You've been curious about homeless people since you were a child, and your father drove you through New York's Bowery as a 9-year-old kid. But it wasn't until you bought a digital camera about 5 years ago that you actually began to go out and meet and talk with them and photograph them. Tell us how that all came to be.
Well, it even started before the digital camera. It was curiosity who these folks were and what they were doing. I mean, it was incongruous that I came from a small town and didn't see people on the street. So knowing that people were living in an urban environment on the street it just didn't make sense to me. So when I had an opportunity, I got my courage up and started to approach some of these people and talk and find out who they were. And they were mostly happy to tell me their stories. And so later it morphed into the faces were so powerful and their stories were so amazing. And the cliche that homeless brings up didn't hold after a while. So I started to see these folks as individuals, and they were me. So,
could have been you.
Well, I think it's always us. I think that's who it is out there. You know, one mistake, or there's 1,000 reasons for being homeless, and all the cliches don't hold.
Now, you have since posted these pictures and some of these stories online, and I think you've been amazed that people worldwide, in fact more than 1.5 million people worldwide, have logged on and taken a look at these pictures. And you've started almost an international discussion about homelessness and rights of privacy, mental illness, those sorts of things. How surprising has all of this been?
Oh, it's been absolutely amazing. I've been overwhelmed, I've been startled, I've been scared. I've gone through just the range of emotions trying to figure out the whole process. You know, the ethics. Is it all right to post these pictures? And so people have come to my defense online, and the debate has gone on online. There are people that look at the pictures every day, and after a while, I said it's all right to do this. And the pictures, if you look at them, they are direct, and they are with permission.
No spy shots.
No spy shots. That's, I think, unethical. If somebody's sleeping in a doorway, that's not my business. So I want to find out who they are. I want to put a face on who they are. I want them to have a chance to tell their stories, and they all have stories. And I'm very respectful. I mean, I think that's the key, and they trust me, and it works.
And in fact, the homeless are supporting this effort. They're actually going to internet cafes to see their own images. So you are giving voice to them, and it's been an interesting journey for you and for them. Your pictures, as you said, they're not spy shots. They're up close. They're personal portraits. And we have some. You talked a moment ago about some of them sort of defying the stereotypes about homelessness. Of course, there are some people out there who are what we stereotypically picture as homeless people. But then there are people, as you said, who look just like me and you.
Oh, yeah. You can't identify them just by sight. I mean, there's people with PhDs and master's degrees and teachers and professionals. I mean, it runs the range. It's not who you think it is.
Give us an idea of the scope of the problem.
On any given night in the United States, there's about 750,000 people on the street. There are 2.3 to 5 million people that are sometime homeless during the year, and that number is from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So those numbers from 2005. So it's boggling. So when you're sleeping in your bed at night and you know that there's 750,000 people, you know, living in campsites, under tarps, in cars, everywhere, abandoned houses and bridges.
And in your own town, whether you know it or not.
Oh, exactly. They're an invisible population to a lot of us, which is part of the project.
Now, I want to talk specifically about some of the people you've gotten to know over the years.
Sure.
Here's Lewis. Tell us a little bit about Lewis.
Oh, Lewis. I met Lewis. He was panhandling in the Port Authority bus station. Lewis is one of those people that seems to have fallen through the cracks. He worked all his life as a manager for a New York racetrack. Unfortunately, he had no retirement. And so when retirement forced him to to stop working. He couldn't afford an apartment. He couldn't afford to feed himself. And so he's on the street. And he is not bitter. He doesn't blame anybody. He said, you know, it's my fault. I couldn't save enough money. And he's out on the street panhandling, and it's startling.
And then you have pictures of victims of Katrina who came to New York. This particular couple that we're going to see, this is the husband, the wife we'll see in a moment.
Yeah, that's Charlie and Chetty. They're actually Philadelphia. They're actually in Philadelphia. Their story is they're middle-class victims of Katrina.
They owned a painting business.
They owned a paint business, and they packed their 2 children up in their car with everything and tried to flee. Their car wouldn't start, so they fled to Sarasota. The government got them to Sarasota. They could not find work, and the government put them out of the motel that they were staying in, and they were forced to come north with a church group to get their children off the street. And the children went to her mother, and for some reason the family couldn't take care of them, and they ended up on the streets of Philadelphia. The picture you saw of Chetty, she had been beaten a couple of nights before by some other homeless. So she looks, and he looks like he's been on the street for years. He threw his arms around me, and he said, you know, why? You know, what's going to happen? And I had no answer. I mean, that's the problem. I had no answer. I couldn't say it's going to be all right.
Now, you followed for a number of years, and I think you say in your blogs you've actually become friends with a number of these people, some you really got to know. Terry, I think, is a good example of that. Terry, who's someone who's now on the inside, which is the way you phrase it.
Yeah. I met Terry and her other half, Nick, maybe four winters ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And I followed them. They had lived in various campsites under tarps.
In the Wilkes-Barre area?
In the Wilkes-Barre area, yeah. So Wilkes-Barre seems like a middle America town, has a large population of homeless. And I started going there because it was just closer than New York. And I started walking the street and started to meet these folks. Terry and Nick are, I hate to say it, typical campers. They find any place that they can, tents, tarps, abandoned buildings. In fact, the coined term in Wilkes-Barre is abandonminiums. And Nick and Terry stayed together, severe drinking problems, and it keeps them on the street. The picture that you saw of Terry, she and Nick had been going back and forth, beating on each other when they were drunk. They love each other, but the alcohol. A few days before this picture, she had beaten Nick with a pipe to 15 stitches in his head. And this one particular day, another homeless man and I went to bring some food to Nick, who was living in an abandoned factory. They were in the middle of a beating, and so we had to pull Terry out of the factory because he probably would have killed her, not intentionally. One of the caseworkers that I work with pulled some strings. We got her into an emergency room, and the next day we talked her into a bus to Texas, back to where she was from, and off the street and into a shelter.
And Nick is still on the street?
Nick is still on the street. I think there's a picture of Nick in his campsite, which is under a tarp, and people are coming and going, but Nick is there. He has nerve damage from frostbite. He had frostbite last winter, so he can hardly move his feet. So he's still out there. This is the picture maybe last week of Nick in front of his tarp.
Your slideshow depicting homeless people in Wilkes-Barre and New York City, you've been taking it to universities across the state and beyond that, trying to get a student-powered group involved in addressing this issue. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it seemed to have a rightness to it. There's such untapped energy, and part of the homeless problem is education. So I think it's really important that people look and see and understand, but that's only part of it. Trying to mobilize solutions, people to work on the problems. We've started an organization at Bloomsburg, which is now an official organization called the Northeast Pennsylvania Alliance Against Homelessness. So we've gone out to various universities, and they've come back with sociology groups and outreach. and have indicated a willingness to become part of this organization. So we are now founded. We will be housed at Bloomsburg. Hopefully we can go out and do educational things. We can deal with politicians to try to solve some of the problems, build housing, and share resources, people that go out to speak, and I'm always willing to do that.
Now, one of the people who has seen your website and some of your slideshows says Clark's portraits don't sentimentalize or ignore the failings of the people he meets on the streets. They neither look up or down. And what you really do, though, is you make viewers connect with those things that aren't easy to look at.
Right.
What impact is it having?
Well, I think it's safe, so people are allowed to look. I mean, on the street, the people out there are generally invisible. We don't want to look because we don't know what they're going to ask. We don't know if they're dangerous. So I do the hard work. I'm out on the street and I'm looking in their face, and the pictures imply that it's okay to look, to tell their story, and they know that somebody will look at these pictures and maybe understand.
Speaking of understanding, you followed for a number of years and actually befriended a guy by the name of Paul in the Wilkes-Barre area. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Paul, where you first found him sitting under looks like a bridge. Yeah,
South Street Bridge. He was under there with a friend drinking. Paul became a longtime friend. I met him that day. He asked me what I did, and at first he didn't want me to take a picture, and that's fine. It's not about the pictures, it's about making the connection. So it's not like stalking prey. Paul finally said, well, you going to take my picture or what? And from that moment on, we became very good friends, and I followed him.
It's tragic how he ended up on the street. He was a normal, everyday working person, and the death of his daughter, who had just graduated from college, sent him into a drinking binge.
Yeah, it was a violent death, and he had to identify his daughter. And he really never talked about it. He talked about it very late in our relationship after he had been binging, and it came out. And so it had set him on the street, and he gave up everything. He said, this is how I'm going to end. He ended up having cancer, lung cancer, and lived on the street, except for the last month somebody took him in. This is a picture of Paul in the hospital. And when I posted his picture on the website, people know these folks from the website. They follow them. They know their lives. They know what's happening. And if I can do that, I think it's really wonderful to follow them. Sometimes the outcomes are not very good, and sometimes, occasionally, good things happen.
And the good thing here is that he was flooded with get well wishes.
Yes, hundreds of cards from all over the world. He was amazed that anybody cared. He was astounded. All the people around him were astounded. Paul ended up in the hospital. And he died of lung cancer, but I saw him a few days before he died. The caseworker that knew Paul found his missing brothers, who hadn't seen Paul in years, went to the website, and they saw Paul for the first time in 22 years. And they stepped up and they brought him home. They cremated him and brought his ashes back. And the story goes on because recently his nephews, or his cousins, who hadn't seen him since high school, found him on the web, found my site, and they sponsored a dinner for the street folks in Wilkes-Barre.
So you're making connections and opening people's eyes. This website, by the way, is www.fotolog.net/Meshuggah. Your webpage is called Meshuggah, which is Yiddish for crazy. Tell us about that.
I was on the street in New York City and talking to a homeless man, and he asked me what I did. And I said, I'm trying to put a face on homelessness and the problems, and I take pictures and I write stories. And he said, you are Meshuggah. And it fit. I guess in some ways I have to be Meshuggah to be out there. It's much more comfortable now, but Meshuggah stuck, and people on the street know me as Meshuggah, and the website took a natural course.
And getting back to the people on the street, here's a picture of someone where we can see how they go downhill. I mean, living on the street takes its toll.
You know, sometimes I'll juxtapose pictures, and sometimes I'll link back to earlier pictures, and it's amazing to watch their lives.
One of the most disturbing pictures is of Emma. When you met her, she looked pretty good. She was out on the street, and your after picture is
Emma looks like
disturbing.
the cover of Vogue magazine. She's French. Her husband was a fashion photographer. She became addicted to crack, left her husband and child. When I took that first picture, she had just gotten out of jail. She said, I gave up everything, and it progressed. That last picture was the last time I saw her. She was 5 months pregnant, still smoking crack. I haven't seen her in a while, but the street word is that she went back to prison, and I'm really not sure what happened to the baby. She was trying to smoke it away, which is an awful thing.
Okay, and here's a shot of Jose. Tell us a little bit about him, and what really strikes me about this is I know your wife is not crazy about this work that you do, this avocation, this passion that you have, because you do put yourself in harm's way. How do you protect yourself from someone like Jose who isn't all there?
Well, you get a street sense and you try to be careful. I mean, it's not something that you can predict what's going to happen, but you know, after a while, your street sense tells you what's okay and what's not, where to go and where not to go. But, you know, there's no assurances. That picture of Jose, I had the camera up and he just came at me, and I guess I must be Meshuggah because I did snap the picture, not knowing what was happening next. You know, I don't see it as dangerous. I see it as being out there and looking.
And now here's someone who, in another life, in a former life, was a professional nurse. Here she is now on the street.
You know, 20 years as a nurse. And she has a degree in nursing from one of the SUNY New York State universities. And she's out on the street. And her boyfriend is also with her. They go in and out when they can get inside. Last time I knew she was living under a tarp on the mountainside. And he, in 1997, was set on fire. He was asleep on railroad tracks and was doused with gasoline. So there's lots of violence out there.
On the streets.
There's violence homeless on homeless, and then there's violence perpetrated on them.
Alcoholism, substance abuse, mental illness, all of these things play a role in homelessness. And for some, and you've watched some, where they've turned their lives around. We have a picture of Pinky, who was out on the streets for years and years and is now inside, as you like to refer to it. He's gotten sober.
Yes.
That's the good news.
Yes, he's living inside and doing quite well. I see him regularly, you know, and these people have slip-ups, but getting them inside is really important. Supportive housing where they can get the treatment, but the red tape is holding back. Pinky got inside because of a caring caseworker that ran through the red tape and helped him through it.
Let's end with some message about, some take-home message about how we can begin to solve this problem, because we're talking about, according to some estimates, nearly 1 million people out on the street.
Oh yeah. Every night there's at least 700 to 800,000 people sleeping out there. So the solution seems to be to come up with affordable housing with support services, whether it's for mental illness or alcoholism, substance abuse, or just people that can't afford to be inside. The price of housing and the red tape are keeping people on the street.
All right. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.